We are now on to session 2. Session 2, we're going to go through the assessment stages. And so what you see in front of you here is the overview flowchart of the assessment process. The student should really have copies of this as opposed to trying to really go through this on the screen. So this is just to give an idea. Spend very little time on this because that's really just setting them the expectation that we have a fairly long, complex process that TBEM goes through. Little picture about the recognition awards. Now, just as a note, we had a lot of debate about whether we even included this particular slide in because our strong expectation is that we are switching the recognition levels for the upcoming period. So you might want to check with Samir to determine whether you want to even talk about this particular thing. If anything, when you talk about it in a historical sense, saying up until this point, this has been the way the award levels operate. And these are subject to modification over time. At this point, I believe that we are assuming that there will be some kind of a at least recognition that someone has crossed 550 and that the award would be given at the 650 level. That's the current working hypothesis. And so there would really only be one award, which would be the 650 level JRDQV, and then the other one would be just a recognition of movement. Part of the reason why there would be the recognition of movement of the 550 is that companies that score above 550 would then have the option and recommended option to switch from doing an annual TBEM full assessment to going back and forth year to year between a TBEM full assessment and then some kind of deep dive assessments on the alternate years, that being a recommendation for the higher scoring companies. Okay. So on the seven-step assessment process, what we'll see here is what we're basically talking about as 7 pieces here. In this case, they are written as being sequential in nature. To a certain extent, you want to make sure people are thinking about this in the backdrop the whole way through. So what you see in front of you at the moment is the chart for just the 7 steps that we are talking about, and we'll organize the following material throughout the slide set into these 7 steps. However, what I'm also putting onto here is the graphic that comes from the Baldrige training for examiners, where it's showing that the steps that are involved in here really are all kind of chained together. And the reason we put this on here is it's a kind of an acknowledgement of the partnership between the TBEM program and the Baldrige program. And as a brief review of the meaning of what that particular graphic is the C means the criteria. So first make sure that you understand the criteria. The next piece over there is the 4 to 6 key factors. So that's basically saying ensure that you are understanding what the organization profile says about this organization, and then the A over on the right hand side refers to the application, that you're using those 3 things, the criteria, the key factors of the application, anchored together. That's what the image of the anchor is, that it creates an anchor that allows you to be able to interpret the application in a relevant way. What's along the bottom portion is you see the number 6 in a circle. That means around 6, and the plus is our strengths, and the delta, the triangle there is a delta that stands for opportunities for improvement. So this is the place where in any given item you'll want to have around 6 total combined positives and deltas, and that to do those, to help you to identify which are the 6 that you would bring up to there, then you have the criteria and the scoring guidelines. That's what the SG stands for, is the scoring guidelines, to help guide you in determining how important is a particular comment in the way in which you assess the company. The next thing over there that has the number 2 and FB, that just basically says create your comments. It's the feedback ready comments. The reason the 2 is there is that in the Baldrige program, there's only requirement for assessors to fully flesh out only 2 of the comments for any given item, and for the Baldrige program that's largely done so that the team leader is able to assess the writing capability of the assessors. In the case of the TBEM program, we're expecting people to do feedback ready thought process on pretty much all of the comments that one's making. That's why we apply the NERD processes to help us to understand the way in which we would create such a comment. And then on the right-hand side for the Baldrige piece, it's saying that you would score using your comment information to help you to determine what the range is for the score. In the case of the TBEM process, we kind of do those a little bit different order, that we try to jump into the score activity before really going and doing the full feedback ready comments. As noted, although that we write things as being somewhat sequential in nature, there's really a bit more interaction going back and forth. So it's a bit more of a intellectual fuzzy process as opposed to it's just a follow the recipe. Anyway, that's for your information as instructors. This isn't information this is not information that you need to share with the students. It's just for you to have on hand if you need it. Okay, so now we start to talk about the key business factors, and this is pretty standard stuff about the what is a key business factor. One of the things that we want to really make sure that we're emphasizing throughout the whole training program is the use of this word key. Is that it's very easy to write down a very long list of lots and lots of things. You can put lots and lots of things in there. The hard part is getting our people to prioritize things on those kinds of lists so that we're bringing the most important things to the top. So this is one of your first areas where you're really able to use that word key. And a key business factor, it's not just a listing of everything that the company deals with. It's what is it that the company's organization is dealing with that appears to be most important in the way in which you would consider this application. So again, this is your opportunity to push the key message. We talk about the KBF meeting. KBF meeting is something that the Tata group does that is not done by the Baldrige process. So this is one of the significant improvements that the Tatas have done over the programs that have been used as benchmarks for Tatas. And so you might want to make sure that you're kind of bringing that forward. It says this is a greater opportunity that helps you to augment the understanding you're getting from the organizational profile in the application. Just also make sure that people are aware that particular KBF meeting, it is a fairly high level meeting, and that people are creating their expectations both directions. The organization running the KBF meeting, they're kind of setting a tone for how they will interact with the assessors. The assessors are themselves given this opportunity to show what professionalism they're able to bring to the table. So the KBF meeting brings a lot of information in there, but it's also kind of an important way in helping people understand how important their role as an assessor is to the company being assessed. That this is really kind of a very high visibility role, and this is your opportunity to kind of push that knowledge to them, that if they're in the room learning how to be an external TBEM assessor, that really is a mark of distinction, and that there's high expectations upon them as well. Then we go through, and the next several slides are merely to follow through what the important pieces are about the organizational profile. It's fine to have a little bit of discussion on each of these. In the way in which the slide set has been put together, we've tried to put images drawn from the same kind of image group on each of these slides, so you'll see the little ink blot people on each of these slides. And all of this these slides are doing as we go through there is following through the organization profile questions, and then giving people a little bit of opportunity to talk about what they might look for in each of those areas. And talking about competition, what kind of strategy, what's the things that are, and knowing that part of what makes something key is how important it is to the future of the company. And so you, again, might kind of go through here and in each of these things say that of all the things that could be shared, which of those would be the most important to be shared. Part of what we kind of want in these kind of a program is, one, is we want to be able to make people able to assess an application very well. But we're also recognizing that the people who are in the room are people who will themselves be influential in how companies write applications. So we would also like to influence the way in which any given organization is using their relatively small amount of pages to communicate. So if we can keep communicating that idea that says that key is what we're looking for, it might help companies to reduce the amount of just kind of detailed data and instead replace that with more insight into what's important in the way in which decisions are made in the particular company. So the understanding of what the KPFs is used for by the assessor. Now, in this case, we're giving a little bit of place where people can kind of volunteer what would they write in for each of these things, as far as is this a good KDF or not. And in the slide set, it's just to reveal on each click the overall answers for each of these three particular examples, and it's more for the purpose of being able to do discussion in the organization to see if they've kind of understood what the purpose of the KDFs are. And then we kind of go through there and say, okay, based upon that, now we're to another one of those slides. It's kind of the standard slide for just a general brainstorming sharing from across the group. You're basically looking for a fairly short period of time for people to kind of throw out some of their ideas of what is key, and encourage a certain amount of discussion inside the group itself themselves. In any kind of an adult learning, people learn best when they are themselves helping to teach. And so when you're able to get conversation going across between the people in the class, they're basically teaching each other, and that's helping them also retain the information much better if they are taking that role as being a coach to people at their table or people in the room. So these kind of stops where you're looking for encouragement, it's not to try to actually answer questions from the front of the room. It's to try to get engagement and get people to really be putting some thought into what we have here. And again, the most important thing that we're trying to get in this area is understanding what that term key is. Okay, and then we do the table exercise, and this is them then getting to have that conversation at the table. Again, this is a standard slide, and your role is to first let them kind of do this work up front for at least 5-10 minutes. For a fairly good chunk of time, they should be operating without you being there guiding them. You should be available to step in if people don't seem to have understood the exercise. That's fine, but let them actually be forming on their own. You want the team, the tables to be creating a role that is fairly independent as we go through the courses. So this is kind of one of your first places to do that. Anyway, instructions are hopefully should be sufficient here, and you can adjust the time for the task. These are merely kind of suggested times. In this case, 15 minutes is what we wrote in here, but you can adjust accordingly. Okay, then now we start going in and saying what's the content of the criteria. Pieces of that are just saying what is the way in which it's laid out, the way in which the process categories and the results category are related. This is where they're starting to kind of see that some of the lingo terminology, the ADLI stuff, the LTCI, the Let's See area. This is not the place where you're going to teach them all of that terminology, but they're seeing how it starts to operate here. Later on, we'll get into more detail on those things. Now, most people end up being pretty interested in the specifics here, so we've created a slide that kind of allows you to step a bit more into the way in which point values are assigned, and so this is a little bit more active slide. First piece of it comes up and says you got the organization profile, and make sure they understand there are no points associated with the organization profile, but it's a very important thing for them to be able to understand in order for them to be able to do any kind of point assessment to the other areas. So we have the process items, and those are listed over here, and so this is where they'll have their list of the specific item numbers, as well as some idea of what the point values are there. And then part of what we're doing in this case is we list the process items there, and then we're then implying that those process items are the things that end up driving the results items. So this is where you're seeing the 450 points versus the 550 points. They should be aware of this. This is an opportunity for you to basically point out that that in assessing the way in which a company operates, it's important that whatever they're doing actually gets results. So you'll see that we have most of the points are associated with results. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have them assume that they can get results without process. In that context, we want to make sure they understand that getting good processes in place, approaches, is like the most important thing, because without those, you're not going to get the results. In this case, the results are the main thing you look at for point value, because they are evidence of the goodness of the process approaches. And then this is the slide where we have the relatively easy way of looking at any given set in the criteria and saying when we use words like basic, overall, and multiple, they need to understand what that's referring to. And I think that as you go through the process, you'll probably end up having more conversations where people are going to argue about whether a response is sufficient. We always will have that thing about uh, giving the applicant the benefit of the doubt, but it's also the recognition that there's only a certain amount of space they have for answering questions. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid people going through a checklist mentality where they might go through the multiple items and start ticking off every word and say, well, if there's not a response to it, it's a problem. Um, that kind of conversation is going to happen throughout the rest of the class. This is the place where you're at least setting the tone for what is basic, overall, and multiple. And we go back to that slide, by the way, later on in the class as well. Then we make sure people are understanding that Tatas have, while we are connected to the Baldrige criteria and the way in which that evolves, we are certainly modifying that to emphasize areas that are key for Tata itself. And so this is a list of the current Tata areas for emphasis that will both show up in the way in which the TBEM criteria differs from the Baldrige criteria, but it's also an expectation of where we would like assessors to place more emphasis because of the keyness of these particular things to the Tata group, on top of whether they are shown in the organization profile as key to the company.